plenty of time to do that, but I'll swing back around after the lesson. If I miss anybody with hugs and handshakes, we'll do that. The topic of the hour is the church and science, and we're going to separate this topic from the second lecture I have today, which is the church and evolution, because they really are two separate topics. They shouldn't be put together. I think Christians have a tendency to think very negatively about science in general because of their feelings towards evolution, and likewise because of science and its persuasion about evolution has a tendency to think very poorly of religion. And really there's a difference between the two subjects. So I want to spend some time in this first lesson just talking about how should the church and how should Christians view the world of science. And there is so much being said right now. In particular, I don't know if you're keeping up with the news, but in the world where these kind of things happen, there is a rise of a group that, for lack of a better title, is being called the militant atheists. Atheists used to be academics that sat in a room somewhere very quietly and wrote papers and made fun of Christians, but were kind of polite about it, you know, in their own way, and had kind of lines they wouldn't cross. They were very intellectual, they were philosophical, they debated in scholarly journals and things like that. There is a new breed of atheists that exists today that hasn't in the recent past, that is angrier and meaner and really not even as intellectual as their predecessors. They are, in fact, one of the things they're getting in trouble for with their own people, with other atheists, is you guys are just using bad arguments. You're making a serious atheist look bad, is what they're saying. The name that comes to mind real quickly is a guy named Richard Dawkins out of Great Britain. He's published the bestseller, The God Delusion, if that gives you any hint as to his intentions. He's a zoologist, as I understand it, and has a knack for making really bold, powerful, striking statements. And just as an example of one of them, he says, the Enlightenment itself is under threat, so is reason, so is truth. I don't want to do that. Richard Dawkins is so bad, my Norton antivirus came up to stop. Okay, try again. The Enlightenment is under threat, he says, so is reason, so is truth, so is science, especially in the schools of America. I am one of those scientists who feels that it is no longer enough just to get on and do science. Right? He's a scientist, and he says, it's not enough just to do science anymore. Well, what else does he want to do if it's not science? He says, we have to devote a significant portion of our time and resources to defending it from deliberate attack from organized ignorance. By the way, that's you. He says, when we even have to go out on the attack ourselves for the sake of reason and sanity. And I'm going to pick on Dawkins a lot. I've got more stuff on him because he makes himself an easy target. His group has done things like push for, and they're not getting very far, but they're pushing for laws in Great Britain, and they'd like to see it in America, that make it a form of child abuse to teach your child young earth creationism, because you're twisting their brain from an early age. That would be a kind of child abuse within their mind. And that's the kind of really radical, militant stuff that they're up to. And they're not making a lot of headway, but they make a lot of noise. And they're changing the conversation about what are the things we should be talking about. Because to them, this is not a philosophical debate, an intellectual debate. This is about sanity. That if you don't believe that science is the only way to understand our world and everything in it, including your own life and how you should live it, then there's just something wrong with you. So what is the church's relationship to science, and how can we proceed in a world where this kind of stuff is being said? First of all, I think it's important to dispel some myths about the church and science. And here I'm going to even use the word church in its broadest possible sense. Anything that calls itself a church. And in some sense, we're talking about the medieval Roman Catholic Church, or even the Eastern Orthodox, because in the broadest sense, is the church, is Christianity, or the Christian worldview, or Christendom, being the word, is it opposed to science in general? And there are a lot of myths about it. For instance, has the church oppressed science through the centuries? And you hear this, you can see it in textbooks, you can see it if you read stuff or listen online or watch TV, that the church really oppressed science for hundreds of years. And that really, the history of that is really hard to find any evidence of it. For example, didn't the church persecute and put to death scientists? And the answer is there's not one single example of an execution in the name of science at the hands of the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, of any church that we know of. We don't know of one single example in history of anyone. Now, heresy, they'll burn people for heresy, but for doing science, there's no example that's verifiable in history that the churches have ever put anybody to death for practicing science. And the example that always comes up, actually, is Galileo. Well, didn't the church, have trials of Galileo? And that story, there's truth to that story, but it's been blown out of proportion a bit. Galileo really got into trouble, not for his views, although that was part of it, but because he just couldn't get along. If you'll read the notes that are in the outline in the book, I have more details about it. He and the Pope were friends. They were friends before he became the Pope, if that makes sense. But he was not friends with the Roman College, with the influential people in the Vatican. And because of that, he did not get along, did not play well with others. In his book about Copernicus' theory about the Earth moving in orbit around the sun and so forth, he wrote his book, famous book, and he had in it characters that are having a discussion. And the really smart guy takes Galileo's view. The guy who takes the Pope's view, his name is Simplicio, the simpleton, right? So he called the Pope an idiot in his book. And it turns out if you live in medieval Italy and you call the Pope an idiot, you're not going to get away with that. And so there were consequences for that. And that's kind of where the story of, well, the church, silenced Galileo. It had to do with more than just science. It was politics. It was people not getting along. And even his punishment. I've seen the movie where he gets thrown in a dungeon. Galileo was an aristocrat. They put him under house arrest in his own mansion. Right? It wasn't in the dungeon with the rats. He was in his own mansion in Italy under house arrest. So it gets kind of blown a little bit out of proportion, like the Christians in all history and time have been putting down science wherever they can find them. Even this idea that, don't Christians, didn't they used to believe in a flat earth, and that's where we set back human knowledge by so far, and that's not really accurate either. Do you know how far back people have believed in around Earth? The earliest map in known human history of the Earth is from between 700 and 500 BC. It's Babylonian. It looks like that. And it's a circle. It's the earliest known map of the Earth ever. From 700 years before the time of Christ. And people in Babylon already believed the Earth was circular. I understand it's not a globe, it's on a piece of clay, but you get the idea. Look at ancient pictures of the coronations of kings in England and in France and other places. And you'll see them either standing on a globe or with the round sphere in their hand because they're kings of the whole earth, right? And that's what they're proclaiming. And what do they have in their hand? Long before Columbus, they have a ball in their hand that represents the earth. So this idea that Christianity believed the earth was flat is bogus. Augustine, for example, I have the wrong date in the notes if you're looking at it. I have him in BC. He lived in AD. He's a Christian philosopher, theologian. Augustine wrote about people, whether or not, he speculated whether or not people lived on the other side of the earth. So what does he believe if he's wondering whether or not people live on the other side of the earth or not? Well, he believes there's another side to it, right? So that's this idea that in that we believe in a flat earth and then Columbus changed all our minds, that's bogus too. Columbus, his problem was he disagreed with the church about how big that earth was. Columbus thought he could get on a boat and basically just sail around and he'd hit China, and there was nothing in between. Aristophanes, the Greek mathematician, hundreds of years before him, had proven the earth was much bigger than that, using just math and shadows at the bottom of the well in Alexandria. So people knew it was bigger. Columbus was wrong. The earth was much bigger than he thought it was. He just got lucky and struck land before he ran out of food and water and called it China, right? It's the West Indies. But anyway, the point is that a lot of this is just myth, and the evolutionists or the atheistic scientists will give you just a little bit of truth to make you think religion hates every kind of science. That simply has never been the case. Just as an example, Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton is my own personal science hero. Isaac Newton invented modern calculus, more or less, invented modern optics, more or less, invented the modern law of gravity, revised Copernicus and Kepler's rules for the motion of planetary bodies, and then he turned, 23 or something. Did it all before he was 30. He's a brilliant individual, and when you read his writings, he has comments like, he'll say things like, Atheism has never had many adherents. It's too odious for reasonable people to believe. Or this statement, where he says, does it not appear from phenomena that there is a being, that's his capital letter, not mine, a being incorporeal, living, intelligent, omnipresent, who in infinite space, as it were, in his sensory, sees the things themselves intimately and truly perceives them and comprehends them wholly by their immediate presence to himself. He says, when I study science, I think I notice that there is an intellect behind what I am studying. He goes on to say, and though every true step made in this philosophy, that is in science, brings us not immediately to the knowledge of the first cause, yet it brings us nearer to it, and on that account is to be highly valued. Isaac Newton, why do you do science? He says, because it gets me that much closer to knowing about God. So does science have something to fear from religion? Isaac Newton didn't think so. He says, religion is why I do science. It made him want to know more. And in fact, if you look in the history of the Enlightenment that Richard Dawkins is so apt to protect, really, most of those guys were really religious. Keith Ward has this list. Copernicus was a lay canon of the Catholic Church. Kepler studied the heavens, believing they manifested the wisdom and beauty of God. Newton formulated the laws of nature in the belief that the wise author of nature must have ordered the cosmos in accordance with rational and comprehensible principles. What is he saying there? He says, you find the big names in Renaissance era or Enlightenment era science, and they're people who are religious. In fact, Ward goes on to argue, something really interesting. He says that's the only way science happens. Think about it. This is Ward's argument. I'll give to you. I just want you to think about it. What he says is, why doesn't the scientific revolution happen in China? Now, China, at this time in history, was technologically advanced beyond Europe. I mean, as far as technology, whether it's telescopes or gunpowder or the printing press, they did everything before Western civilization. They did everything before Europe. But then they stopped. And they never developed the science that we know today. In fact, it's now having to go back over there and kind of plant the seed of the scientific revolution over there. Why didn't they do big science? And what Ward argues is the only reason you would want to spend 5, 10, 15, 20 years of your life studying the cosmos is if you think it makes sense. Eastern philosophy has a tendency not necessarily to believe that. Not that they're opposed to the idea, but that it's not a central tenet of Eastern religions that the universe is a reasonable place. In fact, instead, this universe might be a dream. It might be something part of your imagination. It might be something you have to move past to find real knowledge. Only in the Christian worldview do you hear people saying, this is my Father's world, I rest me in the thought. And we sing that song, right? The idea that God made the world and it ought to make sense. And if I stare at it long enough, I might be able to understand what God did. That's a Christian idea. And that's why the scientific revolution that we benefit from today, that atheists benefit from today, happened in countries with a strong tie to Christianity. In fact, I believe the science of today, even in the hearts of atheists, still happens based on the inertia of the influence of Christianity that came before them. Because of that view that the world made sense and it was worth studying. And that's an idea that's uniquely religious. In fact, not just religious, it's uniquely Christian. Furthermore, Keith Ward goes on to say, it was religion, not secular thought, that propounded the view that nature is founded on a deep rationality. It is no accident that modern science took root and flourished in a basically Christian society. An important motivating force in science is the belief that there are comprehensible, elegant, and mathematically beautiful laws of nature. It did not have to be that way, unless there is a supremely rational creator. And he says, if you read the writings of the earliest of the modern scientists, you see this, they all believed it. And that's why they studied it. Because they believed it would make sense. And that was a religious worldview. So, truth be told, we hear a lot of this about the church as opposed to religion and so forth, but really, truly, religion has been the founding ideology behind the science we have today. It only exists, it was only possible because of the Christian worldview that existed in the world. So where do we get the tension between faith and science? It exists because they are very different ways of knowing things. The materialist worldview believes that only the physical, tangible things you can touch and feel matter. That's how you learn about the world. The faith worldview, the religious worldview says no. There are things that you can't know this way, by touching and feeling things. In fact, the really important stuff can't be learned that way. But there's another way of knowing things. Those two ways are different, and they lead to very different conclusions. If you believe in a science-only worldview, you have no reason to believe in the soul. You have no reason to believe in God or judgment or destiny, or destiny in the sense of things to come, that there's something coming in the future like judgment or whatever. You have no reason to believe in those things because you can't tap on them and see that they're real. I'm going to keep knocking to make sure you're awake. That's the way, the only thing you would come to with that is that the things I can see and experience and study are real, the other things are not. So it comes to very different conclusions on important subjects. I mean, we're not talking about, this is a green shirt. Everyone in this room can disagree about the color of this shirt, and it wouldn't matter at all. That's a fact we can argue about. Is there a God? That's not a fact that you can have idly, right? If you believe in a God, it changes your life somehow because you believe in that. If you believe there's not a God, you're going to live differently than if you did. And so the reason there's tension between faith and science is because there are two different ways of knowing things. And if you feel like you have to pick one or the other, you come to very different conclusions about really important subjects. Do you have a soul or not? Well, that's not one of those idle facts like the carpet is brown that you can know and not care about. Believing in a soul or not changes the way you actually live your life, which is why people are so passionate about this topic, why they're so angry about it. Why is Richard Dawkins angry? I could write a book about that. Why is Richard Dawkins angry? Because this is a passion-evoking topic. I mean, it must change your life depending on how you believe about it. So let me just talk just for a minute about different ways of knowing things. I've, in the past, done some of this material here. I stole all of it from Marion, so I know you've heard some of this here in the past at some point. But it's in the book if you want to look at it. But basically, there are three ways of knowing things. One of them is knowing by science, by the things that we can touch and feel, the senses, right? That I can touch things and know that they exist. And that works for the things it works for. I mean, I left it in the car, of course. Well, here's a good example. I left my phone in the car. This is the key to my car. And there's no key, right? It's actually a computer chip that communicates to my car and tells it whether or not it can start. And if it's in my pocket, it starts, and if it's somewhere else, it doesn't start. And that was astounding to me. If you'd have shown me this 10 years ago, I would say that's a piece of alien technology, and you have got that through a time warp or something. But there it is, and it's in my pocket, and it's amazing. Science does really neat stuff, and it works for what it works for. But science has limitations. There are things it can't know. Science can't do anything with the past, for example. Now, I can examine things in the present that might tell me about the past, I think. But really, science can't tell me about the past. Science can't investigate a question as simple as, did George Washington ever really live? I can't go into a laboratory and work that out scientifically. You can bring me some DNA of a corpse you found, and I can tell you whether it might be George Washington based on his descendants, right? That's science. I can investigate a document you have to see whether it's old enough to be written by George Washington. But I can't really tell you through science whether any event in the past ever happened or not. Because the science only deals with things I can touch right now. And it has that limitation. It seems like there might be some important questions we have about the past that would be important for our lives. And we ought to recognize science really can't get to that. Science can't tell me anything about the big stuff, like beauty. What is beautiful? Every man who has a brain in the room says, my wife. And says it really fast because you don't want to get in trouble, right? So why do you think your wife is beautiful, right? Why do you believe that? Science has no way to reckon with that. Now, we can study the evolution of belief of beauty. We can study the evolution of the face. We can study symmetry of the face. We can study whatever. But in the end, it is totally arbitrary, right? Who and what you decide is beautiful. And that is something that science can't get to. And yet we believe it's important. We believe it's real. We believe it matters to our lives. And science just can't touch that. And so that's something we ought to recognize. There are big, important things in the world that science can't get us to. The other way of knowing, there's three I'll mention. The last one is through reasoning. And reasoning is just working with what you got. reasoning is kind of based on math. If you tell me you have 2 apples, and I have 2 apples, and I give you my 2 apples, reasoning says you now have 4 apples. But the problem with reasoning is it's only as good as what you start with. If you lied to me and you actually have 47 apples, my reasoning was really good, but my conclusion was bad. Right? So reasoning only works if you know something to start with. And so we're left with the second one that's actually very important, and it's knowing things through testimony. I don't think we recognize how many things you know only because somebody you trust told you. I'm going to pick on Judy, because I thought about it. I was looking for a good example of the way here. Judy will be there. Perfect. Judy has been to Hawaii, right? Yes? Judy has been to Hawaii. Now I want you to think about this. How does Judy know she was ever in Hawaii? Now she booked a flight, but that was just some guy telling her that she was going to Hawaii. She got on a plane and she flew, but it's not like she was looking out the window with a map, right? She just kind of, well, she looked out the window, I'm sure. But it's not like she couldn't have been fooled. If they had turned around and gone the wrong way halfway through the flight, Judy wouldn't have noticed, sorry. I'm just thinking, I probably wouldn't have been paying attention that closely. When she got there were signs that said she was in Hawaii. But I mean, anybody can make a sign, right? I mean, I can make a sign, put it in my house that says I'm in Hawaii. She was there, and people that she knew and trusted told her she was in Hawaii. But my point is, if you only believe science, that things you know firsthand, she still doesn't know she's in Hawaii. She needs to walk around the island, she needs to get her map and compare. And what's a map? A map is somebody telling you that's what Hawaii looks like. And so in the end, she had to trust somebody, whether it's the guy who makes the map, her family that picked her up at the airport, the big sign that says Hawaii. She has to trust somebody, even when she's experiencing it firsthand, to know what she knows. Most of the things we know because we trust somebody. That's the brilliant thing. If I can just tell you what's cool about humanity for a moment. The brilliant thing about the human race is that we know stuff outside of our own brain. That we store information in other people's brain. We're putting a new cabin out at the camp that some of you have helped with, and I appreciate that. I don't have to know everything about cabins to help with that. When I want to know how to install the electrical, I call a guy who knows about electrical work. When I want to know about plumbing, I call a guy who knows about plumbing. And I trust him to give me reliable information. And this is how we work as human beings. We don't have to know everything about everything. We trust reliable testimony. Faith is believing in reliable testimony. Faith is hearing somebody like John, who in 1 John 1:1-3 says, I saw Jesus, I heard him, I stared at him, I touched Jesus of Nazareth, and I know that he's real. Well, that's great, John, but I never touched him. Faith is, I can believe the testimony of a reliable person. A person who has nothing to gain, he was impoverished because of his faith. A person who is suffering persecution because of his faith. A person who is going to be, most of the apostles end up dying because of their faith. They have nothing to gain. They have no reason to lie to me. It makes their testimony reliable. And that's the way that faith operates. It's the same thing we do in a courtroom. In a courtroom, we have 12 people in a box, and none of them saw the murder. And yet they're going to reach a conclusion, what do we say in our courts? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Based on the testimony that they find to be reliable or not. That's the same process as faith. It's the same reason you believe there once was a guy named George Washington. Because of reliable testimony that is the case. So what my point is that these are different ways of knowing things. What we're being told in our modern culture is science is the only good one. It's the only way you can really know anything. And what I'm telling you is, if you really believe that consistently, you would find that you really don't know anything at all. I mean, you really, only the things that you personally have experienced are real. Think of how little you would actually know if you couldn't trust anyone to tell you anything. Not in a book, not on the internet. I don't trust the internet anymore, but and no matter what, right, that nothing out there is trustworthy. We operate by faith. In everyday life, we operate by faith. And certainly God calls us to operate that same way when it comes to knowing Him. So the Christian worldview believes that there are things worth knowing that cannot be known entirely by science or by the senses. And we're not opposed to science. We like science. I like my cell phone. I have withdrawals when I don't have my cell phone. Right? I like to have it. I think technology is good. I think science is I get aggravated when I have a degree on my wall in physics and somebody says, well, you don't believe in science. I love science, right? I spend a lot of time studying it. We just think there are important things to know that science can't get to. And so we would like to know about those too. The materialist worldview says, no, no, there's nothing outside the realm of the senses that are real or worth knowing, and so you can't ask such topics about, what about beauty? What about morality? Marion just did a lesson on abortion. That's a question of morality. Can science do an experiment that proves whether or not something is right or wrong? At the end of the day, Marion's argument was based on, is it okay to kill a 10-year-old child for various reasons? Can a scientist tell you, just through science, whether it's wrong to kill a 10-year-old? What experiment would you do to prove whether or not it's okay to kill a 10-year-old boy? Science really just doesn't have an answer. It's not their kind of question. Scientists can have an opinion about that, but there's not a scientific process that says, and here we discovered 10 grams of wrong, and that's how we know that it's wrong. It doesn't work that way, because it's not that kind of stuff. It's a different kind of question, and that's why we're interested in knowing things beyond science. How should we know things? So this is pretty important. Again, I'm skipping quite a lot in the notes, so I hope you'll take a moment and look through that. I'm summarizing a bit. The fact is that without the willingness to believe in the testimony of others, human knowledge is severely limited. This fact by itself is a powerful argument for the validity of faith. That's kind of what I was saying just a moment ago. But if you go through everything you know and kick out all the stuff that you didn't learn firsthand by yourself with no help, we'd be pretty incompetent at everything. The things we accomplish in our culture is because we trust other people to give us information. And that's very, very important. However, there are some people out there who say they don't believe in that. They say, I only believe in science. I only believe in the things that I can experience for myself. I'm going to suggest they really don't believe that. If you were to talk to them, they would really not hold that to be true when it comes to other things. For example, how to fix their car. They go to a mechanic just like everybody else, or whatever thing it is that they have to have help on. We believe and trust the testimony of others most of the time. In fact, it surprises, as much as we know people lie to us sometimes, doesn't it still surprise you when somebody tells you a lie? Why is that? Why are you surprised? Because most of the time, we trust people when they tell us things. Because that's the way we know things every single day. There is a little head that appears on your television screen every evening and tells you things that happen in the world. Tells you what happened in Iran, tells you what happened in Washington, tells you what happened in Oklahoma City, and you believe them. I mean, most of the time, even if you think they're skewed and their perspective is off, you still more or less believe they're trying to tell you the truth. Because we believe testimony most of the time. And a world where we don't is a strange place. And the church needs to remind people of that. When we talk to those who do not accept testimony, or at least who say they do not, we cannot begin with Scripture to reach out to them because they've said they don't accept that testimony. So if you don't accept testimony, where can we start? Well, we can turn to science. So let me just say a few things. Science only gets you so far. Don't read that yet. Science only gets you so far. Science by itself cannot prove there is a God. And I hope I'm not the first person to ever tell you that. Once in a while, somebody calls me up and says, hey, what's your scientific argument that there is a God? And my answer is usually, sorry. Because science, the point of science is, it can't tell you about things that you can't see or touch or feel, right? So science can't do that. That's my point. Now, science can help you to eliminate some alternatives. You say, well, maybe there's not a God, and this is how all the things we know happen. And I can look at that through the lens of science and say, oh, wait a second. That didn't work very well either. And as I start marking off the options, you slowly come back to that conclusion, maybe I'm going to have to figure this out some other way, because science just hasn't answered that question for me. Robert Jastrow was one of those guys. He's a famous NASA administrator, scientist, astronomer, and wrote a fascinating book. I think it's called God and the Astronomers. I think is what it's called. And it just describes kind of his process of working through this question and coming to some interesting conclusions that a lot of people told him they prefer he didn't print, and then once he printed, they said, we prefer you retracted it, because he has some very bold statements. He says, 3 lines of evidence: motions of the galaxies, the laws of thermodynamics, the life story of stars, pointed to one conclusion. All indicated that the universe had a beginning. A few scientists bit the bullet and dared to ask what came before the beginning. And they realized, that the world, science as they knew it, told them the world hadn't always been here. And it just takes one more step of curiosity, doesn't it, to ask, okay, where did it come from? And what came before that? And this is the conclusion to that chapter. It's one of my favorite statements. I put it in every lecture I can possibly put it in. Because Jastrow summarizes what it really feels like to be a scientist who's trying to get all the answers through science and finding out you can't. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. He says, we went as far as we could go with science. And when we got there, we were asking religious questions. There was no way that science could even get close to what we were trying to answer. We had to go somewhere else. And he's one of the guys, there's not a lot of them, but he's one of these guys in big science, doing real serious science. He said, there's nowhere else we can go. In this chapter, he says, it's not just one more experiment. It's not just one more theory. He says, we're not even close. He says, that's the myth that you've been told. Science has almost figured it out. You know how long science has been telling us that they've almost figured it out? For as long as there's been science. We have letters from the late 1800s. Scientists email, or not emailing each other, but you can imagine. They're sending letters back and forth. And what are they saying to each other? Dr. So-and-so, I'm worried we're about to be put out of work because we've almost figured it all out. There's not any more science. And then, of course, Einstein comes along, and it turns out they were wrong about almost everything, right? And then they spend the next century figuring that out. And now, guess what they're saying again? Well, we're really close. Soon as we capture that Higgs boson, okay, we got the Higgs boson. As soon as we get that next thing, we're going to have it all figured out. And Jastrow says, we're not even close. In the end, we get stuck with a religious question that science simply can't answer. Science cannot prove the existence of God, but it can eliminate the alternatives. In the end, believing a reliable witness, a reliable testimony, is still essential. Hebrews 11:6, I know I haven't used a lot of scripture in this lesson because it's been about science. But Hebrews 11:6 gives us the definitive answer that we believe in. Without faith, remember, what are we calling faith? Faith is your willingness to believe the testimony, the evidence of somebody else. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For he that comes to God must believe that He is, and that He exists, and that He rewards those who seek Him. Furthermore, I want to conclude by telling you that science is a perfectly good religious thing to do. It is a wonder in awe at the world that God has created. The psalmist says it like this in Psalm 139. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book they were written. Every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. What is the psalmist saying? When I look at the things that God has made, I am moved to worship. I am moved to awe. I would love to know more, but I don't have all the answers. But these things that are made show us a glimpse of the thoughts of God. Science is great. Science can be a wonderful avenue of religious exploration if it's motivated in the right direction. But in the end, religion has to ask a different question, and science can't get close to it. Because we believe that the things that exist that really matter go beyond the things that are here now. 2 Corinthians 4, for this life, momentary affliction, is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. There's really big, important stuff out there that you need to know about, and you can't know it by science. And that's why we need the church in the world proclaiming the message